This is an exclusive presentation of WOWO 1190 AM and 107.5 FM, Unholstered.
We are back with another edition of Unholstered. Hope you're all having a fantastic weekend. I am just one of your hosts. My name is Kayla Blakesley, and I represent the media side here on Unholstered.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Catina, and I represent the law enforcement side. I am a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and welcome to our show, Unholstered.
Sophia and I have teamed up to bring you kind of the behind the scenes, to share and tell all of the stories that don't often get told when it comes to law enforcement. And usually those stories are not being told by the media, which is why I am here. Sophia, we've been talking about this for a while. We've been saying on Unholstered here that we're going to get to it, we're going to get to it, we're going to get to it. We're finally getting to it. It's just we've had a lot of other things, other more time-pressing things pop up that we needed to address. Like last week, we talked a lot about back to school. So if you missed that one, you can always download any episodes of Unholstered anywhere you download a podcast. But Sophia, we've been saying it. We wanted to talk about human trafficking and sex trafficking, not only as it pertains to back to school, but just how it impacts Hoosiers here in Indiana and how it impacts all of us Americans all across the country. But I kind of want to start with baby steps, because something that I noticed I do during my everyday job, during my radio program on this station that I have during the week, I always kind of interchange the term sex trafficking with human trafficking, even though back in my mind I know they're not exactly the same thing, but yet I always use those terms interchangeably. Can you explain the difference between human trafficking and sex trafficking?
Yeah, certainly. They're not both the same. So human trafficking is basically the exploitation of people for labor, for anything you want them to do outside of the sex realm. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people that come in and they're almost like indentured servants, mm-hmm. Without getting pay. It's $1 billion business.
Yeah.
It's human smuggling, basically,
right.
Taking them across borders to then go into these jobs of forced labor, depending on what they want them to do. Sex trafficking is expressly what it means. You are exploiting someone for sexual means. So you have a lot of people, we've seen a lot of in the massage parlor realm, mm-hmm. Where they're coming over, and they're both. They're forced labor of the massage part, but then also there's a sexual part of that as well. So they're kind of human trafficked and sexually trafficked mm-hmm. at that point. But what we're seeing is just a lot more of this. We have a real problem, and it's not just here in our country. It's worldwide.
Yeah.
This is just a problem that we've seen, and it's only growing bigger. And like I said, it's $1 billion business. And if you don't know, look at our borders now. We have an influx of people coming. We don't know who they are. We have a lot of unaccompanied minors. And the average age for sex trafficking, I'm ashamed to say, is 12 years old.
Wow.
And that's the average. So, there's children younger than that and people older. But what concerns me is just the low age at 12. And when I read this and prepared for the show, I was kind of taken aback myself.
I did not know that. That's startling.
It is. It's very scary because it could be any one of our children.
Yeah.
This isn't just relegated to those people living in poor countries that are coming across the border. These are our own kids. It happens here in America. It happens with American children. And parents need to be aware of what their children are doing online, because that's where most of this comes, where the start of this happens.
You've touched on a lot already. You've talked about our kiddos online, being aware of our kiddos. You mentioned the border. You mentioned it's not only happening here in America and across the nation. Let's just kind of pare some of this back, because there's obviously a lot of ground to cover. Let's just start here. Fort Wayne, Indiana, just the Hoosier State in general. Do sex trafficking, human trafficking cases come across your desk or other department desks in the state often?
In terms of how many calls or how many cases we work per year in comparison to everything else, I wouldn't say it was often, but it does happen.
Yeah.
We've had cases. We have an actual person that works with an FBI task force on this very issue. And
is that their sole issue that they do?
That's their sole issue, and they work with the FBI with this because you have to partner, because it's so widespread and it's so hard to kind of get into that kind of world that you have to work together, and different departments utilize each other and information with each other, because it's so quickly they move from place to place. So you really need that large tentacle of law enforcement out there to kind of making sure you're hitting all the spots that are going. And it's a really challenging case to put together because the victims don't see themselves as victims. They have been groomed and they have been told that this is a family and we love you. And for a lot of these, especially kids that they're getting from online means, they don't come from families that care.
Yeah.
So now I finally have someone that cares, and yeah, they don't see what they're doing as an exploitation of themselves. They're seeing what they're doing as, this is allowing me to have a connection with someone who cares about me, when in all reality, they don't care about them at all. They care about what money they bring in. And it's just hard to get into a mind of someone who is so traumatized with everything and has this complete altered view of reality. It's just hard to get them to come forward and saying, yes, I was a victim. And yes, so when you find these victims, a lot of time they're uncooperative.
Wasn't there a story that just made headlines not too long ago? It was at a Mavericks game or something that a young girl was grabbed there.
Yes, she was grabbed from the game when she went to the bathroom. She excused herself from her father. She was with her dad. She went to the bathrooms. Surveillance footage shows that she had started talking to some man that was in the hallway by the bathroom, and they just took her.
Jeez, that's horrifying.
It is. And she was found, I think, a couple weeks later, but she was found in like Oklahoma or something like that, and she was being sex trafficked. There was, from what I read from the reports, there was no prior knowledge of each other before that game. He just started talking to her, and then he ended up taking her from that game.
So he's probably posting up there near the women's bathroom, just waiting for
an unaccompanied child.
And to pounce.
And kids are innocent. They just think people are I think back of my own kids, and I know a lot of parents can share this same kind of sentiment with me, is like, I'm monitoring my kids' Instagram and Snapchat, and I'm like, how do you have 1,800 friends?
Yeah.
You don't know 1,800 people. So our kids just allow whomever to just friend them, and they have no idea who these people are. No idea. Or people are posing as kids. A lot of these people pose as kids. They get into these kind of chat rooms on these games on, like, I think PlayStation and all those. They have like interactive internet gaming that you can play with several people. Well, I've heard of stories of people posing as kids in these games. They gain your kids' trust, and then your kids start telling them more and more and more about their lives and about what they do, where they live, where they go to school. And your child doesn't have to give them your address. You can tell them what school, what sport you play, what you might look like. Hey, you got brown hair, you got brown eyes, and they can go to a yearbook.
And they have profile pictures too posted.
Yes, and they can go to a yearbook for that school, or find something online of the school cross country team. He said he ran for cross country for such and such school, and now I can figure out who you are and how easy it is this day and age to find out where people live.
Do human trafficking, sex trafficking cases pop up more during the school year? I just asked that because we are back to school. Most of our kids are already back to school here, at least in Fort Wayne, Indiana, within Allen County. Or do they pop up more perhaps in summer months? Is there a correlation?
I don't think there's a real correlation that anybody's ever kind of pointed out, but I would, and just in thinking of this as you pose this question to me, I would think that the summertime would be a little bit more, because kids are given a lot more freedom in the summer because they don't have school to go to. During school time, they're pretty regimented. They've got school, they've got activities, they've got things going on. But in the summertime, those things are not going on. So now mom and dad are at work and I'm at home alone. So I'm bored. I'm going to get on my game. I'll get in these chat rooms. I'll get on Instagram and we'll do chats with people. And that's how this starts. But they groom special children, neglected kids, kids with low self-esteem, low self-worth, and I'm going to sit here and tell you this is not a socioeconomic thing, because kids can be neglected at any income level. Just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean that you're a good parent, and just because you don't make a lot of money means you're a bad parent. This runs the spectrum of everything here, and people know who to exploit and they know how to exploit, and we have to protect our kids. We have to do it. That's our job as parents.
How can parents go about educating their kids, teaching their kids, without scaring them? Because you also don't want your kid to walk around in fear every day. And also, but at the same time, getting your kid to take you seriously and not being, oh, mom, oh, dad, you're crazy. I'm careful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you really tap into educating your kiddos?
I think it just comes with talking and having those good relationships with your kids. Well, I don't mean to scare my kids, but we do talk about relevant topics. Like I talked to them about when this happened, when this girl was taken, about how easily that can happen. And especially, I always have these conversations with my daughter because it seems to be more prevalent that girls are taken, although it can happen to boys. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it seems more prevalent that it's girls that are taken. I have these conversations all the time about, who you're with, why it matters who you're with, because in an instant things can happen. And because you're not that type of person doesn't mean the person you're with isn't that type of person. So it matters who you hang out with, matters who your friends are, matters where you're hanging out. And just to be aware, I don't mean to scare my kids, but they do need to be aware that bad things can happen. Mm-hmm. And I think sheltering kids from that is detrimental. Mm-hmm. As well as telling them too much, right? We have to find that balance.
Find a happy medium.
Yeah, and I think just having that open dialogue where your kids can come to you and have those conversations and know that you're a safe place. Yeah, I told my daughter, I might get upset with what you say, but I always want you to come and talk to me. I'm not going to be happy with a lot of your decisions, but they're your decisions to make, and there's consequences to those decisions. So just know that I'm available for consultation. And I'm going to butt in because that's my job as a mom. Mm-hmm. I'm not your friend. I'm your parent. And we can be friends later when you move out of the house. But right now I'm your mom. Yeah. And I just think being willing to have those conversations with your kids and I think for them, knowing that you even care is a big step.
Speaking of care, help me out with this because I went to the southern border about 2 years ago. And that's when I felt like I got highly educated very quickly on I'm going to call it sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering epidemic that is right at our southern border. It's horrifying how it kind of all plays out and all the details into that sex trafficking specifically and the human trafficking. But to me, Sophia, I walked away from that trip and I just felt like nobody cares. I also take it to, Jeffrey Epstein. And Ghislaine Maxwell, she got, 20 years? Yeah. Not even being investigated by the DOJ or anything.
And we still haven't seen the list.
We still have not seen this list at all. Where is the list, for Pete's sake?
Yeah.
I can't figure it out because I feel like I want to scream from the rooftops about what kind of an issue this really is, especially because we're talking about primarily our kiddos.
Yeah.
Why is it not? Is there something in that world, in the legal world, in the law enforcement world? Am I missing something of why there seems to be a lack of care?
It's not a lack of care on law enforcement side, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's nobody in my line of work that I know that doesn't want to see that list.
Right, but you would think both sides could come to the table and agree, we want to see the list. We want to do something about it. We want to solve this problem.
Well, do people really want to solve this problem?
Probably
or
not.
They just want it to
moneymaker.
Continue.
Yeah.
So they can continue doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
We all know that this is a list of heavy hitters.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it hasn't been exposed. I mean, I'll say that.
Yeah.
I know that.
The client list, yes.
Yes,
I get
the
that.
client
I get
list.
that in terms of why that's probably not been released.
But think of the power that holds.
But even on a scale of along the southern border, and just in terms of human trafficking, sex trafficking.
I think people in the communities really care, but what do they do? I mean, they're screaming at their government officials, and then and I'll get into the Democrat-Republican thing here because it's pertinent, but even the Democrat congressmen and women of that area in Texas are screaming. They're
screaming, yeah. I talked to them.
The governments of the small town mayors, and my mom's from Del Rio, Texas, so I know that area very well. Mm-hmm. We visited there all the time. I have family that was Border Patrol. So these cities are being overrun, and they just have no more resources for the people coming across the border, but for their own people who are American citizens here. And so they started busing them to areas, and they're getting like a couple thousand people, and they're feeling overwhelmed. What do you think?
What do you think's happening
200,
in Texas?
400, 600,000 people along this border, these border states. Well, how do you think they feel? So I think we really have to take a hard look. Mm-hmm. And, we have elections coming up, and elections have consequences. So I hope that whoever maintains whatever majority that they have, that we really start taking a hard look at these issues, because they matter. They matter to our safety of our own citizens, our children, and to these poor children and people coming across the border, because half of them might not even want to come,
Right.
but they're coming because they're forced to come.
Sure.
But this taps every area. I mean, you can see that when they do stings, you can see who's arrested. I mean, it's teachers, it's cops, it's firemen, it's politicians, it's clergy. It's everyone, and it's not just elite. Now, are they able? They're the ones that are able to fly to the private island
Right.
and do this. But there's, they say that one of the biggest days for this trafficking comes on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah.
In the areas that the Super Bowl's occurring, in the area that the NBA playoffs are occurring, in the World Series are occurring, all of these sporting events, there's an influx of people coming for sexual activity and to be for exploitation of children. It's just, I don't understand it myself, but there is a demand, much like the drug demand, right? But I do believe I've heard reports that sex trafficking has overtaken the drug money.
No kidding, I've not heard that.
As of late, just because there's such an influx of it going on throughout the world, that they're making just as much money in sexual trafficking, and it's a lot easier than the drugs.
So when you do arrest someone for human trafficking or sex trafficking, what usually happens to them in that scenario?
So those are most of the time, depending on what has occurred, those are going to be federal charges. So that's why we do work with the FBI.
feds, okay.
Yeah, because a lot of times that crossing state lines, that occurs way more often than you'd know. And they travel to different states, and they do so very quickly. There's this whole Craigslist, all these kinds of little ad places that they have their own secret languages of where they'll be, what they're doing, and you really have to infiltrate that. But as soon as you find one, then they're popping up somewhere else. So it's a constant cat and mouse game. But we do what we can with the resources that we have.
Are they usually prosecuted?
A lot of times they're not, because the victims are so unwilling to cooperate.
Well, that's kind
and
of where I was
we really
gonna go
need
with
them
this.
for that. But there's a lot of times these children and these women are just so groomed.
So brainwashed.
Yeah, it's just Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah.
and they just don't feel like they've done that person has done anything wrong, that they were a willing participant. I don't want people to look at these victims when they don't want to cooperate as someone then that's complicit and you wanted to do this, because a lot of times these victims are afraid to come forward. They may have been forced or coerced into this. They may have family that someone's saying, I'm going to hurt your family if you say anything. A lot of times these traffickers hold their documents, so they don't have any of their IDs or their passports or anything like that until they're done doing what they're doing. And so they're just afraid of retribution from these, or not retribution, retaliation from these people that have been doing these things to them. So I just want to take any kind of blame off a victim in these kind of situations, because a lot of times you don't know how long they've been there, even as children, and what they've been told or what they're hanging over their heads.
Really good point, Sophia. I'm glad you brought that up. So not only are you beating your head trying to get people to care about this issue, but then when you finally are able to do something about it, then you kind of run into this scenario.
Yeah, it's really hard. That's why the RICO laws come into effect, tax laws, that they really help then with charging, because, they're not paying taxes on this money that they're bringing in, and those RICO laws come in as well.
And that's usually how you nab them then for...
Yeah, usually that's what ends up happening. But sometimes you do get a victim willing to cooperate. It happens. And I think that's a good day. And I just can't imagine being in that kind of world and having that kind of mindset. And it's just, it saddens me that this goes on in our world, that people have the ability to exploit people the way they do, in that manner, especially children.
Are you able to speak to the recovery process for someone who was human trafficked or sex trafficked? I don't know, again, if you've obviously dealt with any in your career, in your time with the Fort Wayne Police Department, or followed up on any stories from some of these women or children, but can you talk a little bit about that recovery process once maybe you do get them and you are able to help and give them some guidance? Yeah,
so that's a long recovery road, like any severe repeated trauma, especially sex trauma like that, because if we're talking about children, even teenagers, young adults, it's a long recovery process. It can be done. There's a lot of people that have made a recovery, but again, it's one of those things that's it's so individualized because it's what kind of treatment are they getting, and it's available. There's treatment, there's counseling, all that stuff, but it's a hard thing to beat.
Yeah.
Much like a drug addiction, this is something that you just feel. A lot of these kids already felt unworthy. That's why they are in the positions that they were. That's why they went looking for connection. From someone who was more than willing to give it to them for a cost.
Online in those video chat rooms or whatever.
Yeah, they're just looking for someone to care. And there's a lot of people that will pretend to care. That's why it's so important to have that relationship with your kids. Try. A lot of times it's hard, especially at the teenage years when they don't want to talk to you and they don't want to hang out with you.
Which, for full disclosure, your kids are teenagers.
My kids are teenagers, yeah. I'm a little different situation than most people. My kids, I have a good relationship because they were looking for that connection when I adopted them. So I feel like we have a really good relationship that probably isn't normal, but I do try to facilitate that and give them what they need and be a listening ear when they need it. And I think that's all we can do as parents is just, we got to kind of ride out the teenage years. I mean, I was a teenager. I still remember. So I think being involved, just being interested and sometimes it's hard not to be the badgering mom.
Right.
But sometimes kids need that.
I'm curious because you mentioned sporting events. You specifically mentioned the Super Bowl and how the sex trafficking, human trafficking kind of ticks up around these sporting events. But we had the Super Bowl not too long ago in Indianapolis, here in Indiana. And I don't even know if you can answer this question, but was the Fort Wayne Police Department or other departments recruited to come down kind of for security or surveillance or anything like that because of the uptick in human trafficking and sex trafficking?
I don't know. I don't know what our task force did. We have
Gotcha.
a few people on that task force. We have one person that's dedicated solely to them, and then we have other detectives that help when needed on certain cases. So I don't know what they were tasked with at that point regarding the Super Bowl that happened in Indy.
Sophia, as we kind of come up on the end of Unholstered here, can you just kind of throw us out maybe some tips on how our kiddos or how just anybody can avoid sex trafficking, human trafficking, especially when it comes to online? Because like you've talked about it a lot, how our kiddos are really kind of being sought via these online platforms. Yeah,
sure. As parents, I just want every parent to be involved. You should be looking at your child's cell phones occasionally, spot checking when you can. There's no foul in that. That's your phone. If you're paying for that phone, that's your phone. So I want you to just take solace in that you're not.
Can I throw something out in there too? I can't remember the gentleman's name. You brought him on from your digital department. He talked a lot about your digital
Detective
footprint. Detective Helmsing, and how it can impact your future way far and beyond. But something he said, and I've carried this with me. My daughter is only 2, but I'm going to carry it with me. He talked about this exact thing with your cell phones and your kiddos' cell phones, and periodically checking on them. And he had such a great suggestion. He said, when you go to Verizon or AT&T, you get a contract for that phone.
Yes.
He said he creates a contract for his kiddos. He makes them sign those contracts. And if you breach those contracts, he takes that cell phone away. But one of the things he said in that contract is, spot checks from mom and dad, certain apps that you can and cannot have. We have passwords to all of your apps. And I thought that was... I was like, I love this idea. My kid is totally having a contract with mom and dad for her cell phone.
Yeah, because what's our job as parents? To prepare them for a real world.
Right.
And they're going to have to sign contracts. They're going to have people sometimes spot checking their work at work, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, making sure they're on the up and up. So I'm just preparing my kids. I do the same thing. Mine's a verbal contract, not a written one. But
I am writing it down in big bold letters.
But we go over those things with my children. I do it often and remind them, hey, look, my phone for my convenience, not your entertainment, right? So just, don't let your kids share personal information, like where they live, who they are, names like that. Set their profiles to private and then figure out who they're allowing to have access to them and what they're doing. Because a lot of times these kids just accept anyone, and it could be anyone.
I'm guilty of it. I do that.
Yeah, you don't know. I mean, I went through and cleaned up my role. I only have people I have relationships with now.
How many friends you got now on there, Sophia?
835 on
nice.
Facebook. That's it.
Girl.
And I know I have a personal connection to each one.
Wow.
So, yes.
I have like 5.
Well, a lot of that's high school,
Fair enough.
and college. But don't accept those friend requests for people you don't know. Don't share photos that you wouldn't be comfortable with your parents seeing.
That's good.
Or
That's good.
If you as a parent would be uncomfortable of what your kids are showing, then have them take it off.
Yeah.
I've sent messages to my friends when I see their kids posting, A lot of times it's girls in their bikini shots, and I'll send it. I'm like, hey, did you know your daughter posted this?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, but I'm going to have her take it down. I'm like, yeah. I said, I love it. She looks beautiful. I said, but not appropriate for the amount of people that she has seeing it. If you plan to meet someone online, and this goes for a lot of these dating apps, make sure it's in a public setting and make sure that your friends know where you are. Put that location finder on your phone. Turn it on. Share it with a friend so they know where you are. And always do it in a public place. You never know who you're meeting. A lot of people pretend to be someone they're not until you meet them. So just a lot of catfishing going on. So just be aware of that. And, if a job offer or if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. I let my daughter go down with some friends when we were in Indy to the mall. And she said this guy from this kiosk came up and told her how beautiful she was. And she wanted her phone number. Or he wanted her phone number. And I'm like, yeah, I hope you ran away. And do we need to go back in the mall so Mom can have a talk with how inappropriate that is? And she's like, no, Mom, I told him. And I told him you were a cop. So I'm like, okay.
My mom's a cop.
Yeah, I told him, I'm not giving you my phone number. And she walked away. And it's like, my mom's
Good
a
for
police
her.
officer. Stop. Don't ask me that.
Yeah, good for her.
So, you got to be willing to have that conversation and tell your kids. It's okay to tell people that. It's not being rude. It's setting your boundaries.
Yes.
And then just if something feels wrong about a conversation you're having with someone online, stop it.
Yeah.
Block them. You don't have to continue the conversation. It's okay to be rude. And I wouldn't even call that rude.
Or as you put it, setting your boundaries.
I would say it was setting a boundary.
I'm going to hold on to that one too.
Yeah, so it's okay. You don't know them. It's okay to stop the conversation.
Yeah, you don't owe them anything.
You're not going to hurt their feelings.
We are out of time. As always, we always run out of time on this show. Really thought-provoking stuff this afternoon. Stuff I didn't really want to think about, Sophia.
I know, but we have to because it's the world we live in.
Especially, I'm a mom.
Yeah.
My daughter's 2 years old.
Yes.
This is the world we live in, and that is reality. So I appreciate you doing all of your homework on that one for us. As always, if there's any topics you specifically want to hear Sophia and I talk about, you can text us 46862. Just make sure you put Unholstered in your comment so I know that you're talking to us. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. And remember, you can listen every Saturday morning at 10:30 on WOWO 1190 and 107.5 FM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.